Out on the open plains where the sky never ended and the land forgot mercy, night didn't come gently. It fell like a curtain, swallowing the last light of day, wrapping the world in a silence too wide to measure. Cowboys called it the long hush. It was beautiful, yes, but it was also the hour when danger woke. After a day of driving cattle through dust and sun, a man's body begged for rest. But sleep was never simple. The darkness carried whispers, wolves in the brush, outlaws in the hills, the restless shift of cattle breathing in their thousands. The night had ears, eyes, and teeth. So the cowboys learned to rest the way soldiers did, half aware, one hand near the gun, one ear open to the wind. The fire burned low, steady as a heartbeat. Around it, the men spread their bedrolls in a wide circle, boots off but guns close. The smell of coffee and smoke clung to their blankets, and the ground beneath them was still warm from the day's sun. Horses were picketed nearby, heads low, tails swishing, their ears twitching at every sound. They were the first line of defense, nervous, alert, honest. A horse didn't lie about fear. The older cowboys didn't talk much before sleep. Words made the dark too real. They'd roll cigarettes, take slow drags, and stare into the embers. Someone might hum an old tune, or not a song, just a memory, and for a few minutes the fear in their chests eased. Then came the silence. It started soft, like a breath. The men would lie still, eyes half closed, listening. The prairie spoke in rustles, the whisper of grass, the shuffle of hooves, the far-off cry of coyotes. But when that stopped, when everything went still, that's when the danger began. Sometimes it was wolves. You'd see their eyes first, green and steady at the edge of the firelight. They circled slow, waiting for a chance, their paws silent against the dirt. A cowboy on watch would lift his rifle, thumb the hammer back just enough to click. That sound alone was enough. Wolves understood guns. They always had. But wolves weren't the worst. The worst were the men who hunted other men. Rustlers, bandits, deserters, the kind of drifters who thought nothing of cutting a sleeping man's throat for a saddle or a pistol. They moved like shadows, quiet and desperate, faces hidden by scarves and dust. Cowboys could feel them before they saw them. The air changed, the horses shifted, the firelight felt thinner. It was instinct, old and primal, something the West taught you fast or killed you for lacking. That's why they slept in watches, 2 men awake at all times, one near the herd, one near the fire. Every 2 hours, the guards changed, rubbing sleep from their eyes, stretching legs stiff from riding. They didn't just guard against bandits. They guarded the herd from stampede. Cattle could spook from anything. Thunder, lightning, even the flicker of firelight. If 1,000 head panicked at once, they'd crush everything in their path. Men, horses, gear. So the guards rode slow circles in the dark, humming or whistling to keep the herd calm. Sometimes they'd talk softly to their horses or to themselves or to God, anything to keep the loneliness away. Inside the camp, the sleeping cowboys dreamed shallow dreams, the kind that ended in the crack of gunfire or the howl of wolves. They'd wake with hearts racing, fingers clutching their pistols, before realizing it was only the wind. Fear never left you completely. It just became something you learned to live beside. But exhaustion was stronger than fear. After 15, 16 hours in the saddle, a man's body shut down whether he liked it or not. His bones ached, his eyelids fell. He had drifted into that fragile sleep of the trail, the kind that could break at a single sound, yet still felt like mercy. And somehow they rested, somehow surrounded by danger and distance. They managed to dream. There was a rhythm to it, danger, exhaustion, surrender, the same as the land itself. The West didn't want them dead. It just wanted them tested. And every night they passed that test, one breath at a time. Still, the peace never lasted long. The dark had a way of reminding them how small they really were. Sometimes it came as a noise, a branch cracking too close. Sometimes a smell, blood or smoke. Other times it was the wind shifting, carrying whispers that didn't sound like the wind at all. No one slept deeply then. A cowboy's rest wasn't measured in hours, it was measured in moments. A few stolen breaths before dawn, when the sky went pale and the fire turned to ash. A few seconds of peace between one danger and the next. But those moments were enough. enough to rise again, brush off the dirt, pour the coffee, and saddle up before the sun cleared the horizon. They didn't talk about it much, how fear and fatigue became one and the same, how trust between men meant more than prayer. You learned to sleep because you had to. You learned to wake because someone else was counting on you to, and when morning came, you thanked whatever gods might be listening that you'd survived the night. Because out there, where wolves howled and bandits hunted, sleep wasn't rest. It was defiance. The trick, the old hand said, wasn't to stop being afraid. The trick was to befriend the fear, to let it sit beside you like an old dog, to nod to it, and then lie down anyway. Fear kept you awake when you needed to be, but it couldn't be allowed to run the camp. Every cowboy had his ritual for surviving the night. Some chewed tobacco before bedding down, the bitter taste grounding them. Some whispered prayers they'd never admit to saying aloud. Others, like old Boone Carter, always sang under his breath, low, off-key hymns from his mother's church back in Missouri. He said wolves didn't like holy words, and men with bad intentions didn't like a voice that sounded too calm. When Boone sang, the others slept easier. The campfire's glow stretched only so far, a trembling circle of light surrounded by miles of nothing. Beyond that line, the night belonged to everything else. You could feel it, the stare of unseen eyes, the subtle hum of the land alive and watchful. It took a certain kind of man to rest in that world. Young cowboys learned the hard way. The first few nights they'd lie wide-eyed, flinching at every sound, clutching their pistols tight enough to leave bruises. The older men let them be. Everyone had to earn their sleep out here. By the end of the first week, exhaustion always won, but even in sleep the body stayed tense, ready. No man on the trail ever truly relaxed. One hand always found the revolver's grip, even in dreams. If a coyote's cry cut through the air, half the camp would stir instantly, the sound of metal and leather filling the space before silence returned. Then, as if nothing had happened, they'd roll over and drift back under. The line between waking and sleeping blurred until the two became one. The trail taught you that awareness wasn't something you could turn off. It was something you carried, even into your dreams. Every now and then, though, something real would come crawling out of that darkness. There was one night, remembered long after by those who lived it, when a pack of wolves crept too close. The fire had burned low, the guards had switched shifts, and the wind carried the faint smell of beef from the herd. The horses began to stamp and snort, their fear cutting through sleep like thunder. Boone was first on his feet, rifle in hand, eyes already catching the movement in the dark. He didn't shout. Shouting meant panic. Instead, he fired once into the sky, a warning. The crack shattered the quiet, and a dozen eyes flashed back in the firelight, bright and wild. The wolves hesitated, then melted away, silent as smoke. When the echoes died, Boone poured coffee, sat down by the fire, and didn't say a word. The others lay back down, hearts still racing, pretending to sleep, but they all saw the way Boone's hands trembled as he brought the cup to his lips. Bravery didn't mean you weren't scared. It meant you did what had to be done while shaking. Bandits were another kind of danger, clever, human, hungry in a different way. They didn't always attack. Sometimes they watched for days, waiting for the right night, the right fire, the right moment. Cowboys knew it. That was why the fires burned smaller on some nights and why bedrolls were spread farther apart, so no one shot into the same cluster twice. Sometimes they'd fake sleep, leaving one man lying with eyes half open, his pistol resting under his blanket. It was a dance between trust and suspicion, between knowing your brothers would protect you and knowing the world outside the fire might not. Faith helped, not always in God, but in something. The land, the rhythm, the sunrise that always came no matter how long the night felt. Some men wore crosses around their necks, others carried tokens, a lock of hair, a coin, a feather, little things that reminded them of the human world that waited beyond the wilderness. When they closed their eyes, they didn't see peace. They saw home, a porch light, a warm meal, a face they loved but hadn't seen in months. Those memories became the safest place they knew. Still, the trail always demanded payment. One morning, after a restless night, they found one of their herd missing, a rustler's mark left on the dirt nearby. The tracks were fresh, the work clean. Someone had crept close enough to steal without waking a soul. That was a worse wound than any bite or bullet. It meant the night had gotten past them. They spent the next week sleeping even lighter. The guards rotated more often. No fire after midnight. Horses tied closer. Guns cleaned twice a day. You could feel the tension hum through camp like a wire pulled too tight. And yet, men adapted. They always did. By the second week, the rhythm returned, the uneasy peace that came with knowing you'd done all you could. The fear was still there, but it softened into something else. Respect, maybe. The understanding that the night wasn't out to get you, it was simply out to test you. The Cowboys started calling it earning your rest. Because if you'd faced wolves and storms and shadows, if you'd kept the herd calm and the fire burning, then every minute of sleep was a victory. There were rare nights when the world gave them mercy, nights so still and gentle that even the crickets seemed to sing in tune. The cattle lay quiet, the air smelled of rain far off, and the stars stretched so wide that the whole sky looked like a sea. On those nights, the Cowboys slept deeper. They dreamed not of danger, but of open roads, green grass, the sound of laughter in a saloon, the taste of whiskey that didn't come from a tin cup. The kind of dreams that reminded them why they stayed alive in the first place. The dawn that followed those nights was always softer. The fire still glowed, the men stirred, and for a brief moment, the world felt almost kind. Coffee steamed in tin mugs, and the fear of the night became a story. Something to laugh about, something to tell the next young rider who couldn't yet close his eyes. And every morning, someone would say the same thing, with a grin that didn't quite hide the truth. Still here. The same words whispered by every cowboy who ever made it through a night he wasn't sure he'd survive. After enough nights on the trail, fear turned into familiarity. The sounds that once made a young cowboy's blood run cold, the snap of branches, the whisper of grass, the cry of coyotes, became as much a part of life as the creak of leather or the beat of hoofsteps. You stopped jumping at every noise. You learned to tell the difference between danger and the ordinary heartbeat of the land. That's how a man stayed alive without losing his mind. By then, sleep wasn't something they chased. It was something they caught in pieces, like dust on the wind. They'd lie down knowing that danger was close, but that they'd met it before, stared it down, and woken to see another dawn. Confidence born from repetition made the darkness less cruel. But sometimes when the night stretched too long and the fire burned too low, the loneliness came creeping in. The kind that didn't come from being alone, but from knowing you could vanish out there and the world would keep turning just the same. That's when cowboys talked to the fire. They'd whisper to it like it could listen, like maybe it was an old friend. They'd tell stories about home, or women they once loved, or things they'd never had the courage to say in daylight. Some prayed, others cursed. All of them hoped the flame would keep burning until morning, and the fire always did. It wasn't just warmth. It was a promise. It meant light. It meant safety. It meant the night hadn't won yet. When the fire crackled low, one of them would always stir, crawl out of his bedroll and throw another log on. Even half asleep, their bodies remembered the rhythm. Every few hours, feed the fire, check the horses, scan the dark. They did it automatically, without words, like breathing. There was a beauty in that quiet cooperation. No one ordered it. No one had to. Every man knew that survival depended on everyone else's watchful rest. One night, the wind shifted warm, carrying the scent of smoke from somewhere far off. The guards noticed first. They woke the others with a touch to the shoulder, a whisper. Riders. The cowboys rose without panic, their movements slow and sure. They didn't grab their guns right away. They listened first. The sound came faint but certain. Hooves. More than one horse moving at a trot. Could be drifters. Could be trouble. They doused the fire quick, their faces falling into the kind of calm that only men used to danger could manage. The world dimmed, swallowed by starlight. They waited, hands near their weapons, eyes adjusting to the dark. Minutes passed. The sound faded, then vanished. Whoever it was had turned another way. The fire stayed cold until dawn. That was the thing about nights like that. You didn't always know if danger had passed, or if it was just circling wider. The uncertainty was worse than the fear. When morning finally came, they laughed it off, the tension breaking like ice. "Ghost riders," Boone muttered, his grin tight. But his eyes never stopped scanning the horizon. Even the bravest men carried ghosts from the night. Every cowboy had a story, someone lost to wolves or to rustlers or to the endless, merciless weather. Death was a constant companion, sometimes close, sometimes distant, but always near enough to hear breathing. And yet, the cowboys didn't see themselves as heroes. They saw themselves as men doing what had to be done, protecting the herd, watching the fire, staying alive until sunrise. It was the small things that kept them human. A shared pot of coffee at midnight, a quiet joke traded during the watch, the way they could laugh about fear because laughter was lighter than silence. When the stars were clear, they'd find the North Star and trace their way home in their heads. It didn't matter that home was months away. Knowing where it was made the night a little softer. Some kept journals, scraps of paper filled with rough handwriting, notes about weather, cattle counts, and sometimes the things they couldn't say aloud. "Wind strong tonight," one wrote. "Heard wolves close. Missed the sound of a door closing." The trail was long enough to make poets out of men who didn't know the word. They found beauty in small mercies, the smell of rain, the warmth of a shared blanket, the taste of hot coffee after hours of cold. When the moon was full, the plains glowed pale and silver, bright enough to see your own shadow. On those nights, wolves stayed quiet, and even the horses relaxed. The men would stretch out on their backs, hats over their eyes, and talk in low voices. "You think about heaven much?" one might ask. "Only when I'm close to hell," another would answer, and they'd all laugh softly. But beneath the laughter lived truth, the kind you only spoke in darkness. They knew that every night might be their last. Every time they closed their eyes could be the final time. That knowledge didn't make them bitter. It made them alive. It sharpened every sensation, the crack of fire, the chill of air, the sound of a horse breathing beside you. And when you live that close to death, you start to understand life better than most. Out there, sleep wasn't weakness. It was courage. It meant trusting the men around you, trusting the fire, trusting that the world would still be there when you woke. And when dawn finally bled across the horizon, slow, red, and silent, there was always a moment of stillness before the camp stirred. A moment when you realized you'd made it again, that somehow against all odds the night had let you go. Someone would stoke the fire back to life, and the smell of coffee would spread like forgiveness. Boots would scrape the dirt. Voices would return. The fear of the night would fade into memory. And as the sun rose, painting the plains gold, every man felt the same quiet gratitude. No one said it out loud, but they all thought it. We survived again. By the time the trail turned gold again, the cowboys had learned that safety wasn't about fences or walls. It was about trust, the fragile kind built night after night in the company of men who had watched you sleep with a loaded gun in their lap. You never forgot who had taken the late watch while you dreamed. You never forgot who'd kept the fire burning when the wind tried to smother it. That was how a cowboy measured brotherhood, not in words but in wakefulness. Those nights wove the men together tighter than any bloodline. A man who had seen you shiver beneath a blanket, who'd shared his last match to relight the fire, who'd whispered, "Rest, I got it from here." That man was closer than kin, and the trail was full of those moments. Small, quiet, unforgettable. When the wolves howled and the night pressed close, they found comfort in proximity. The heat of another body nearby, the shared rhythm of breathing. You could feel your own pulse calm in the presence of others who refused to give in to fear. Sometimes even the wind seemed to understand. It would rise just enough to push the smoke away, clearing the air so the stars came through bright again. Those stars, they were a map and a prayer both. Every cowboy knew them like the faces of friends. Orion guarding the herd, the Big Dipper pointing home, the slow sweep of the Milky Way marking the passage of time. They didn't need clocks. The sky kept time for them. When danger came, it didn't always announce itself. Sometimes it crept in soft, a thief's hand reaching for a saddlebag, the flash of a knife in the dark. But every camp had its watchers, men whose instincts were sharpened to a knife's edge. They'd move like shadows themselves, quiet and controlled, ending threats before the rest even stirred. If you woke to find your fire still burning, And your horse still there, you never asked questions. You just nodded across the morning coffee and said, "Appreciate it." That was enough. Even when no danger showed itself, the memory of it lived in the way they slept. No cowboy truly uncoiled. Even in rest, one leg stayed bent, ready to rise. Their hands found the familiar weight of the pistol near the bedroll. The mind never stopped listening. But the body, poor tired body, found its own kind of peace in motion, the rhythm of breathing, the warmth of the coals, the distant murmur of cattle. It lulled them into the fragile, necessary sleep that came from knowing you'd done all you could. And maybe that's what courage really was. Not the absence of fear, but the decision to lie down anyway. Morning after morning, they proved it. Sometimes they'd wake to hoofprints where something had wandered too close in the night. Sometimes they'd find claw marks on a nearby log. Once, a half-eaten rabbit left just outside the ring of firelight, wolves marking their territory, reminding the men that peace was borrowed, never owned. The cowboys took it all with the same quiet acceptance. The land had rules and they had learned to live by them. They said that if you respected the night, if you didn't waste food, didn't curse the wind, didn't build your fire too high, the land would let you rest. The ones who didn't learn that lesson often didn't come back. Every scar, every sleepless night, every scrape of fear carved the same truth into them. The West didn't belong to anyone. You could cross it, work it, survive it, but you couldn't tame it. And yet even in that untamed vastness, cowboys found something close to belonging. The open sky became their roof. The earth became their bed. The hiss of fire became their lullaby. Years later, long after the drives ended and the rails cut across the plains, old cowboys would still talk about those nights. They'd sit on porches staring westward, as if they could still see the glow of campfires across the horizon. They'd tell the young ones about wolves and storms and the strange, watchful silence of the prairie. But mostly they'd talk about the peace that came right before dawn, the kind of peace that only comes after surviving a night you were sure might kill you. One of them, gray-haired and half-blind, once said, "You never sleep better than under danger. You never dream clearer than when you don't know if you'll wake." Maybe that was it, the paradox of the West. The nights that threatened to end you were the same ones that made you feel most alive. In those hours between dusk and dawn, life was reduced to its purest form: warmth, breath, vigilance, gratitude. The fire cracked, the horses shifted, the stars turned overhead, and beneath it all, the steady rhythm of men daring to close their eyes. By the time the first pink light broke over the plains, washing away the stars, the cowboys were already stirring. The cook would kick at the ashes, coaxing the coals back to life. Someone would cough, someone would laugh, someone would stretch the stiffness from their bones. And always someone would say, "We made it." They never meant just the night. They meant the life itself, because every sunrise was proof that the wild had spared them once more. They'd pour coffee, pass tin cups hand to hand, the steam rising like a prayer. The world felt clean again, as if the dark had forgiven them. And when they mounted up, driving the herd toward another horizon, they did it knowing the cycle would begin again. Night would fall, wolves would cry, bandits would watch, the fire would burn, fear would whisper, sleep would come, and they would lie down, exhausted but unbroken, under that vast cathedral of stars, trusting the same fragile things that had always kept them alive: each other, their horses, their faith, their fire. That's how they survived. Not by conquering the night, but by learning to share it. They didn't sleep because it was safe, they slept because morning was worth waking for.